Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Product Drrrama podcast. This is Kate. Wait, where's Kate? Let me call her. Hi Kate, do you remember we are recording a podcast tonight? Oh, you can. Oh, you in karaoke? No worries. I'll handle it myself. Hey you, come here.
Yeah, me?
Yeah. Do you know English?
50-50?
Okay, take a seat. I need you to help me with something.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Let's do it! When it comes to developing a successful product, we often talk about collecting customer feedback or building strategies. But where in all of this process is the place for technical leadership?
Our today's guest has a lot to share with us. Today we have Peter Shankar. Please welcome him. He's CTO of Equity Multiple. And hi, Peter.
Hello.
I'm well, and thanks for having me.
Can we start with you describing your working experience, your role in your current company?
Sure. So I've been basically technical for my entire career. I mean, more on the managerial side of late. But I started, as a full stack engineer at a big consulting firm. Kind of worked my way into other consulting positions where I was responsible for, architecture. Migrations, sort of your implementation consulting, kind of through Accenture and SunGard. Those were past employment experiences. And then eventually I kind of started aligning myself a little bit more with an industry vertical. And the one that was very attractive to me was commercial real estate. It's sort of a business or a vertical that is pretty new, I would say, in terms of application to technology, meaning that there's so many layers of the onion that you can peel back and apply productization and systemization, so on and so forth. And long story short, I landed with Equity Multiple, an investment platform for commercial real estate. I think this is sort of the perfect fit for me, a combination of startup and industry that I really find interesting.
Thank you for that. So, what does it mean for you being a CTO?
Yeah, I think it's sort of dynamic, I would say, meaning it's, in the beginning when we were 4 or 5 strong, it baby's crying in the background. In the beginning, when we were 4 or 5 strong, I mean, I think it's true, kind of what they say, right? You're wearing a lot of different hats, and you really can't confine yourself to one way of thinking, right? Like, if as much as you want to do just architectural projects, you can't do just that, right? Like, you're almost, in a certain sense, you're immersing yourself in so many different verticals. And then over time, I would say my role now has shifted to be, I hate the word strategy, but I am more strategic, right? So whatever that means, and I think for us it means that you're taking in all these business inputs, and then you're outputting a plan for some future state, right, where technology plays a really, really big role.
So, and which skills you think are essential for CTO?
Or if we phrase it differently, like which skills, if we remove them, will make it impossible for a person to be a CTO?
I mean, I have sort of a contrary view to this. I kind of have this idea that like, you can be a non-technical CTO, and I wouldn't quite qualify myself as that, but I certainly don't. I'm not like deep in code day to day, right? So I think the easy answer for most people is to say that a lack of engineering skill at a technology company is going to, that's probably the thing that will disqualify them. And I would largely agree. I think you're starting to see an increasing number of companies who, they're not pure play technology companies, and they're like more, they're regular businesses, right? Like us, we're an investment business, but we're a heavily technologized or a technology enabled investment business, right? And so you still have to do all the other things, right? We need to have IT ops, right? We need to have a solid buy it strategy when we're going out and evaluating vendors and implementing systems that are that are built for us, right? And it's not all about your one product stack and getting really, really deep into it. So I know this is a really long answer. I guess I would say that in my, in the sort of job description that I have, I think probably the most important thing that you really can't live without is empathizing with your employees, right? Like I think you need to have a common ground, some level of understanding that allows you to remove blockers on their end, um, but also guide them in periods of confusion or uncertainty, right? And that I think that's a broad skill set more so than a deep skill set. Taking that out, I think, would be overly detrimental to any organization.
Thank you. And what are the main CTO responsibilities today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to procure the strategic roadmap, the technical strategic roadmap, right? So, it's part maintenance, right, and making sure things are working day to day, and in an ideal situation, you're really having to do very little of that. But I think in my experience, it's about 50-60% of it, right? So it's ensuring that that you're releasing on time, that we're properly maintaining the general sort of day-to-day health. And then I think maybe the more important part, which is a little bit more tricky, it's again to procure the roadmap, and that's sort of the transformational side, right? And so that's the forward-looking piece. Where do we want to be in 6 months, in 3 years, maybe even, right? And how do we align the dominoes so that they fall in the right direction?
Do you think that has changed over the decade?
The CTO, I guess you can kind of merge the CTO, CIO, chief information officer. Increasingly, I hear those terms sort of thrown around in a more coalesced fashion these days. So you look at like a Goldman, who now they say Goldman Sachs, big investment bank in the U.S. They say they're a technology company. They're no longer a bank, right? And that may be marketing, but it's also, there's part truth there, right? And individuals who are at the closest of the information paradigms tend to do really well, right? And CTOs have found themselves closer and closer to the data that drives the business and to the processes that drive the business. So that's very different than your CTO of 10 years ago, where your concern was, validly so, desk support and backups and kind of managing your IT infrastructure that powered the day-to-day goings on of the business, right? And now it's more so that you're partaking in the day-to-day goings on of the business.
And does the role CTO in real estate businesses has any specifics if compared to general description?
I mean, certainly at minimum, an interest in real estate. I think, it's a really good question, because I think what you have to do is evaluate what's going on in these industry verticals. In real estate in particular, it's sort of it's a dated mode of operation, right? So, and what I mean by that is, you look at like let's say I wanted to buy a building, right? As an operator, I would buy a building maybe once a year, right? Or maybe twice a year, right? And so the pace of the business is very slow, right? And so so you could get away with an Excel spreadsheet to manage your entire business, right? And so the role of the CTO ostensibly is to manage that one spreadsheet. Not manage it even, just make sure that you can open an application that manages it, right? So and that's a grossly simplified explanation, but increasingly, companies are becoming bigger. They're transacting faster, and all of these legacy methodologies and legacy ways of operating now need scale, right? And we need to we need the ability to uphold the faster pace. So that's one piece of it. I think the other piece of it is just the really wide proliferation of data, right? Like where decision making isn't done in isolation anymore, right? It's not in our business, it's not like a single, like it used to be a single person who knew a market really well. Now you can get all that data elsewhere. And so it's a combination of pace and then more inputs into your business. And that I think that those types of situations create really interesting opportunities for CTOs nowadays as compared to before.
Mhm. Yeah, but in my opinion, that is also uh, pretty much generic to any industry or any domain that
Sure.
is not purely technical. It's just the specifics of the domain itself, right?
Absolutely. I think there's some parallelism, right? Where you see like businesses that function offline but are increasingly being taken online. I would say that's a powering component of this, right? Because they realize the ability to scale and to drive fundamental growth for their business by taking it online, right? That's a central theme. I mean, certainly for us, we can't do what we do without an online presence, and that has facilitated our ability to scale quickly. Could we be completely offline? Probably, but we've very specifically chosen to solve problems by making ourselves highly available and accessible.
I was a developer in on a project for quite a bit of time, and during that time, that project changed 3 CTOs, and every time it was like changing the direction, not completely, but very dramatically. How do you think, or what CTO should do in order his vision made it beyond his personality?
Look, I mean, the job of the CTO is to work with the CEO and other business leaders and ensure that you're implementing a technology vision that supports the strategy of the business. Now, and again, if it's a technology business, then the CTO is very prominent, and they need to they're probably in, maybe they're even the CEO, right? They're setting direction of the company. Um, so I think transitions are really important, but they're also incredibly costly, right? And so sometimes I find that like it's better to get into I mean, taking your case in particular, right? Where there was leadership turnover, and you really needed to the vision for where you wanted to be was lost, and it was reset. And I think the issue there is that the worst thing that can happen is that you lose your ability to deliver like something end to end, right? And I think almost in a cultural sense, you're kind of depriving your team of a success, right? And so even if it doesn't fit your roadmap, right, or it's a slight deviation, right, like all vectors aren't aligned, sometimes it pays actually to just kind of taking that over the finish line, I think, and um, and book that as a success, right? And then take that win and then really build on that to to change the strategy. But stopping, realigning, like kind of imposing this cognitive load on people because they've got they've got to drop everything that they were doing and focus on something different now. I think that's inherently dangerous. But uh, um, I think it's ever present. People do that all the time, but good leaders, I think, are able to mitigate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. It was very demotivating in some sort that like I was with my all hands down because I have to throw away part of my work. Yeah. In your opinion, what fraction of time technical team has to spend on researching innovation in order the product to continue innovating?
Like we basically we break things up into three different categories. Run, right, which is sort of like your maintenance and your you're like what's the minimum amount of work that you need to do in order to keep your application or your software or whatever it is up and running, right? Grow, which is how do you push for like sustainable scale basically. So you're not necessarily like your features. There's not a lot of like feature delta, but there's a decent amount of work that's done to sort of scale up, architectural or what have you. And then there's transform, right? And a roadmap is predominantly, I would say, it's probably weighted towards the growth and the transformational side. I, I think about this a lot, and I guess I haven't really found like a good resource. The best thing that I found is, an arbitrary number that was kind of tossed out, and I think we kind of fit this mold. So we're right around 50 to 60% in the health and maintenance bucket, right? So all activities that we do in health and maintenance, i.e., run, fall into that bucket. And then we're probably right around 30% in the grow bucket, meaning we're taking what we currently do, and we want to scale that up. And then lastly, we're whatever the remainder is, 10 to 20% we're in the transform bucket, right? And so those and part of that makes sense too, because when you have something that's working, you're probably only introducing like 1 to 2 big transformational initiatives per year, and then the rest of it is like fundamentally testing, right? Like you're kind of figuring out if something that is on your roadmap might work or might not work. It's probably not even on your roadmap. It might be on your extended backlog or something like that. But that's I would say that's roughly our breakdown. And I think some of that changes too. Like, we completed a round of funding recently, and our CEO and myself were pretty gung ho on innovating and really kind of testing out other avenues, whether they be product centric or business centric, and encouraging our team to kind of to be a little bit more playful, I suppose. That's a piece of that as well. So the point I'm trying to make is that we adjust those ratios as we go along. Maybe in the future we'll be far less maintenance. We'll have the best DevOps machine that we can ever have, right? Everything is automated, and we can focus in on other activities.
When I was interested in technology, I was doing my research because I was curious how it could be applied to the product I was working on, and it was like my pure initiative to have like to make a prototype and to show it to management and to get some feedback and maybe iterate a little bit, but no one ever put any time slot for me to experiment. Or, okay, after I showed them some prototype, I was granted some just a little bit of time to play with it a little bit more. But before that, it was my pure initiative. Do you have some direct tasks in Jira for research, or how do you do that practically?
First off, we're huge fans of prototyping, right? And I think any good engineering organization, but I would really extend this to any organization. Our investments organization kind of does this as well. They'll prototype Excel models and new underwriting methodologies. The reason why I think the reason why I firmly believe in prototyping is that there's an amount of, like, we're always teaching ourselves as engineers, right? Like learning is as a core component of our function, and you take that away, and I think you're taking something that is visceral to your process out of the equation, and I think that actually diminishes success, right? So I know that's easy to say. The way that we implement that practice then is, we have the research Jira ticket, right? Like there is no outcome from this particular ticket. We expect nothing, that we expect no no product out of it outside of a demo, right? Like, show us what you learned, and if we need to scrap it, then we can scrap it. If it's going to build on your knowledge and we can apply that to a future project, that's all gravy, right? And so we do a lot of those. I would say we do, each engineer, I would say, probably has at least one of those per quarter, where they are, they're taking about a week to go out and explore an area that they're interested in that has a stated business benefit. Where we just prototyped. We're increasingly moving to microservices. So our head of engineering went off and took, he actually took a full month to basically prototype sort of a Kafka infrastructure, sort of like a pub sub architecture, right? And we're, we were so impressed by what he was able to do, and now that's going to be part of our strategy, right? And so I think, I think as long as you make these things cultural, right? Like and as long as you count that as part of that transform bucket, that 10% to 10 to 20%, then you it's easy to argue for business alignment. I would say there's other things that we're sort of experimenting with. Hackathons, we're starting to do those more regularly. We want to foster sort of that intra-group collaboration again. So we're doing pitch days within our organization, and the winning pitch gets to go off and actually implement that thing. And that's, those groups are composed of business users and technical users and designers, and really make really foster this culture of innovation, basically.
And to build that culture, there are a couple of options I can see here. You hire all people you think who fit your team, and you state, like, here we experiment and innovate. You also have to do that. Or you look for people who are eager to innovate, who have this entrepreneurship in their mind.
Well, first off, I think you always have to hire for your roadmap, right? Like, I think there's this sentiment in general that you hire good developers because they're good developers. I mean, I can kind of see that, but ultimately the tried and true methodology here is that you hire people that are going to be able to implement your vision, right? And you have to do that. So if you're hiring someone that's got a proven track record of just pure experimentation, I think you might be risking not being able to implement your roadmap, right? What I would say is what you're trying to do is you're trying to hire individuals who I like to think of things as like making decisions, right? So you're hiring individuals who are, yes, they are experimental by nature, but they're actually, but it's more about understanding a problem and making a decision on that problem, right? Like my job is to hire people so that I have to make less decisions, and I view experimentation and innovation, at least a component of that, I view that as as a decision, right? And so you're increasingly outsourcing those decisions downstream, to people that are maybe even more capable than, I mean, they probably are more capable than me, or people that are more specialized. So I think that's, that's a piece of it. We still have to have our guardrails up, like, this is our vision, make sure that you're pushing towards that vision. And then, like we said before, like you're coming to the table with a pitch that is fully backed by information and data.
You started as a technical person, and being a geeky developer or architect is one thing, but doing a CTO's job is way more managerial and way more like communicative position than just doing coding. What is your keys or hints for making that transition for a person who is a technical person but wants to be a CTO?
Yeah, because you manage that you have to bring your vision to people and how to make people believe in your vision. So how to engage them, how to inspire them.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like it's two questions, right? One is how can you build a career towards where you can enter sort of the domain of a CTO or a leader, basically, or an executive, as a technical person. And then the other one is how do you instill a vision into your team? Okay. So I mean, those are like the ultimate questions. I don't think that there's one way necessarily. I can speak to how I got there, and maybe that's helpful. So, I think the way that I ended up where I am at is pretty simple. It's I was employee number one at a technical organization, right? And or at a new organization, at a startup, and I was the only technical resource, right? So in that situation, I think it's incredibly important that you immerse yourself in the strategy of the business, right? You can be as technical as you want, but if you're not aligned with your CEO or with the purpose of the business, the vision of the business, not the vision of your team, then I think it's really an upward battle. I think that there's certain things that, in my view, are really good proxies for leadership. So mentorship is incredibly important. If you can show your leaders that are promoting you to become another leader, if you can show that you can not just guide a team, but make a team better, I think that's incredibly valuable. If you can also, I think like one of the best leadership qualities that I found, and something that people should hone, is if you can, it doesn't really matter in certain situations. It doesn't matter what the composition of your team is. I know we want to hire for the roadmap, but sometimes you're dealt cards that you can't do anything about. And in those cases, individuals who are able to like rearrange the positioning, the skill positions, so that you're actually able to fulfill the goal of that team, irrespective of who's on your team, that's a really, really good quality. So, not saying that you're basically resource constrained, or that, that we need this particular role, being able to rearrange proactively the Legos to fulfill that goal, that's a really, really good way of distinguishing yourself as a leader. As far as setting a vision goes, you can't do that without like real top-down sponsorship, right? So, if you're looking at like our mission and vision as at Equity Multiple, my technology vision has to map directly. It's a child of our company vision, right? So that helps, right? So if you're able to basically say that, if you follow the tree of, product vision to departmental vision to, company vision, and that you're in fulfilling your part, you're actually making a difference at the very top. That's incredibly important, right? So we call that like, perfect vertical alignment, right? That's difficult to do, but that's certainly one thing that we really strive for. And I think the kind of taking that a step slightly, like a little bit further, the way that we've really been able to push on that is just using a framework, right? And so if you have that alignment, then you can also kind of go a step down. So you can basically say, as an individual, these are your goals. This is how it aligns into this product vision or this company vision, and work towards that, right? Like in giving people the sort of the benefit of like I guess a highly personalized vision for themselves. I think you're really I think you empower people to kind of to find their own way of hitting that, right? And as long as that's complementary of the overall strategy, then I think you're in a good place.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the answer. But last question, I think the last one for today. What do you recommend reading for people who want to become a CTO?
I mean, look, so I think there's any number of, there's a lot of literature out there, obviously, on sort of, systems of design, and, like you can get like highly specialized. I think, what we've discussed here is that part of like a major component of the role of a CTO is to be really broad, and to like I think I forget who it is. I think like Mark Andreessen says, like you got to fly low but really fast, right? And so you're shining your spotlight constantly on groups or on projects or whatever, and you have to build empathy with those groups. No way are you going to be able to go in and be like super technical in each of these areas. And so, I personally find that the most valuable thing here is to like read and expose yourself to things that are like perfectly orthogonal with what you're doing, right? And our mind kind of works in these interesting ways, right? Like our best ideas are in the shower, right? I mean, we can't take unlimited showers, so like expose yourself to, I mean, maybe you can take unlimited showers, who knows, right? But at least expose yourself to things that make you think a little bit differently and that keep your kind of mindset more open, and in doing so, you're really training your mind to take in a more diverse set of inputs, I think, and that's a huge requirement for a CTO.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Do you have any other questions, Max?
I mean, as for me, I was curious, like, when you're CTO and coming to a team, I mean, like, the stories that you mentioned, Anatoly, when you was depressed developer who, like, lost your aim with your team, yeah?
Uh-huh.
So when the CTO of your team has changed.
Yes.
I mean, as a CTO, for you, like, if you would come to the team like Anatoly had, when everyone is depressed, like when they really lost their final goal, like how can you inspire them? How to properly manage those people, to engage them with your own vision?
The best leaders, I think they're able to respond to sort of those adverse situations, and in general, I find that that those leaders basically align themselves almost perfectly with, with the individuals, right? And so if, Anatoly, if you had, if a new CTO came on board, I think a way to handle that is for them to, fully understand your role, your needs, your problems, and it's almost like pair programming for a few days, right? And like really, really getting deep into the task so that you can truly understand, kind of the perspective of the job. And listening and learning becomes a real core aspect of that function in those early stages, right? And then I think only if you understand what is currently going on in a very deep way, then can you take your head out of the sand, and start really moving things around or shaking things up a little bit in order to better align the strategy. So it's not so much, feel good events or like strategies to sort of, to improve sort of the cultural components. I mean, those are all great, but ultimately the CTO has to basically unblock the blockers for their team, right? And I think they can only do that if they deeply understand what their team is going through. So I have a one of the best managers I ever worked with. He basically, he would go in, he would fully assess what the capabilities of the team are, what they're currently working on, and then if there were gaps, he would own those himself, right? And I love seeing that, right? Like when you're in the trenches working towards a common goal, there's no better way of building, of reinstituting sort of the trust that you might have in a manager.
Thank you. Okay, let's wrap it up. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for sharing your experience and your vision of the role of CTO. And
thank you so much. I think now I have way more things to think about during my next shower. So
yeah.
So that's
An
great.
infinitive shower.
Finish shower, yeah.
Infinity shower leads to infinity ideas, right? So, but thank you so much for having me. This was great fun.
Okay, yeah. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, Peter.